This video was brought to you by Squarespace. Right now, right this second, what would an Ocarina of Time remake look like in this current year? This modern gaming landscape, this particular generation of Nintendo? It's an interesting question because up until now, all their 3D Zelda re-releases have been remasters. Every pre-Breath of the Wild title has been given a facelift and some quality of life features and even been reworked a tiny bit. But that's it. They have yet to give any of these games the complete remake treatment. This is something that would be totally new. But what would a full-blown Ocarina of Time remake look like today is also a very big question because there are so many ways Nintendo could go about it. And that is because of the current situation the Zelda series finds itself in. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom represent a very different direction for Zelda, just a complete reinvention of the series. And at this time, we can't possibly know exactly what the next big mainline game is gonna look like, but based on what Aonuma has said, it's pretty reasonable to imagine that they're gonna continue focusing on the same ideas that define this modern age of Zelda. Non-linear quest design, open-ended puzzle solving, and just overall player experimentation. Generally speaking, the 3D and 2D games have historically delivered their own unique versions of the Zelda experience. 2D more focused on tight design and puzzle solving, 3D on traversal, combat, cinematics. But Echoes of Wisdom kind of rewrote the rules. That game was basically Breath of the Wildified, a 2D game but with much of the same focus as its 3D contemporaries. Story progression wasn't as open as, say, Link Between Worlds, but the puzzles and combat and just overall world and dungeon design was all about player expression and experimentation. To me, this is why everyone's first thought when they hear the words Ocarina of Time remake is to wonder if they're gonna Breath of the Wildify it. Nintendo seems to be so married to this new format that it's only natural to wonder if they might try to reimagine their old games in the new style. I personally have my doubts, which we'll cover in a bit, but since it's an idea that kind of permeates the discussion, I absolutely think it's worth exploring what it might look like if Nintendo remade Ocarina of Time into an experience more in line with the modern titles. Well, if you want to imagine a reckless, gratuitous adaptation, shoving a round peg into a square hole, it's almost too easy to conjure a quick picture. Every locale is now part of one big, seamless open world, with Hyrule Field kind of taking up the most space in the middle. Enemy camps and towers, and of course, shrines now pepper the whole entire kingdom. Dungeons can be done in any order. Maybe the first 3 have to be completed first, just so you can, become an adult or whatever, and then you can do the rest in any order, but for the most part, it's totally up to the player. Okay, see, but even in trying my hardest to paint broad strokes, we're already smashing our heads up against the problem. It's something you just cannot gloss over. Players progress through Ocarina of Time in a pretty linear fashion. The story follows a natural path, and most importantly, abilities are earned in a thoughtful, delicate chain of progression. To strong-arm this experience into a totally non-linear one, you would have to completely redo everything, and I mean everything. If you gave the player all of the major abilities, boomerang, bow, lens of truth, hover boots, just absolutely everything right off the bat so they could take on any challenge in any order, you would have to remake the dungeons entirely. And, I think it kind of goes without saying, this would rob them of their, first their identity, but then also their super satisfying lock and key nature. And then it would also just be a mess from a design perspective. The abilities in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom were very carefully designed so that every single ability has a ton of different uses and they all kind of function together. It's kind of a small, but really focused and intelligent moveset. You simply could not do that with all of Ocarina of Time's items. It's too many items, it's too many abilities. A lot of items have kind of specific uses that are still very integral to the progression of the game. You couldn't necessarily just adapt them, but then removing them completely, again, would just be all right, well then, why are we even doing this? And then, yeah, again, the story issue. There's so many story beats that all have to happen sequentially, or they just don't work. The story problem maybe is the lesser of the problems, as long as you had like an isolated area that you occupied when you were a kid, and then when you became an adult, then it kind of opened up to the rest of the world. I'm really not exactly sure how that would work. Maybe you could work something out there, but I think for the most part, the idea of turning Ocarina of Time into Breath of the Wild, I don't think it works. I don't think you could really do it. Turning it into this like totally or mostly open sandbox, open air experience, I just think it would be a totally different game. It would have to be so different that I feel like it would defeat the purpose. Like, why would it even be a remake? What would be the point of that? Like, clearly you just wanted to make another Breath of the Wild. You should have just done that. Okay, but if you want to be a little bit more nuanced about it, they'd want to like kind of inject it with a lot of Breath of the Wild DNA, but not necessarily turn it into this like giant, completely open thing. Okay, well, make the world bigger. Just like first and foremost, you know, what's the biggest difference there between Ocarina and Breath of the Wild? Just make it bigger. Each area is just kind of blown up. You've got more ground to cover, more space to just like fill with activities or whatever. You could still make it a seamless world as long as you didn't give the player the ability to just like climb over whatever. As long as there was still gating, it could still be one giant place with no loading zones. And if you are gonna blow it up like that, you really would have to fill it with lots of stuff to do, you know, especially Hyrule Field. It really would need to be like the big thing in the middle. So yeah, it would probably be like enemy camps. There'd probably just be like enemies all over the place. Towers, yeah, sure, why not? Towers, they kind of work in any setting where you got a big world, so sure. And then like maybe it could still have shrines. You know, Ocarina of Time has lots of like holes you can drop into, little kind of individual stuff to play around with. Okay, yeah, shrines, why not? Maybe the shrines in each area are tailor-made for the items that you get there. So that solves the progression problem, and maybe these shrines are not as open-ended. You know, this is less of this like open-ended experimental physics kind of thing. Maybe it's a little more straightforward, just some puzzles that use the tools that you have acquired, and maybe there aren't as many. You know, it's not like 120 or whatever. Maybe it's just a good amount, just a good handful per area, just some extra stuff to do so you can say you followed the brief. You know, you ticked the boxes that you needed to tick in order to say this is a Breath of the Wild flavored Ocarina of Time remake. See, but then we still run into the same problem with item progression. If you're not getting them in this careful order, then this is just a totally different game. Both a different kind of game and a game that is different from Ocarina of Time. But if you do limit progression in the same way, the same lock and key kind of format, then why have you made it so big? You know, like, why have you made it this big sandboxy open world if it's not even really that sandboxy? What's the point of having this super vast kingdom if you're gonna be railroaded so much? That's just gonna be frustrating. So yeah, I'm kind of doubtful that Nintendo would clumsily force these two styles together. I mean, there's a fine chance that we would see a little bit of that modern DNA kind of leak into a remake, maybe some modern quality of life stuff that we would recognize from the newer games. But Nintendo is nothing if not careful. Whatever they do, it has to feel right to them. A smooth and interesting end-user experience is of utmost importance. Also, historically, their remakes have been absolutely faithful to the originals, maybe even to a fault. Even with ground-up remakes, they are often hesitant to change much of anything. There's just no precedent for this kind of thing, and I see no reason to believe that they're gonna start taking their old games and just tearing them apart and changing everything. Don't get me wrong, they do love making people mad, but I think this would be a little bit too far. They understand how important these classic games are and always strive to preserve the original experiences however they can. So, if I'm right that they're not going to just Breath of the Wild-ify the game and will instead do a more faithful remake, what would that look like? Before we continue dreaming up new ways to play a 30-year-old game for the umpteenth time, a quick reminder that this video was brought to you by Squarespace. If you need a website but have no experience or knowledge in the field of website creation, no problem. Squarespace has got you covered. You don't need to write so much as a single line of code. You can just use the intuitive builder to put everything together, lay out everything however you want, embed pictures and videos and anything else. You can even start with a template if you want to get a big head start. And before long, you will have yourself an awesome, professional-looking site. You could do something personal, something for your business, storefront, info page, blog, anything you want. My site, Arlo Recommends, is a basic blog, so it's super easy to draft up a whole bunch of posts, schedule everything to publish at later dates, and it'll even automatically generate social media posts for me. Squarespace even gives you a great suite of analytics to keep tabs on what's working and what needs work. And if you ever need more, they also offer a bunch of powerful extensions to supercharge your site. To try out Squarespace for yourself, head to squarespace.com for a free trial. Then when you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/Arlo to save 10% off your first website or domain. And now for today's recommendation, a communal history of Metroidvania video games. My good buddy Derek Bittner from over on GVG is working with Lost in Cult on a big retrospective of the Metroidvania genre, featuring a ton of material from a ton of different folks. Basically one big love letter to the genre, and it looks like it's gonna be amazing. So go check it out and consider dropping a pre-order. Thanks again to Squarespace. Now let's continue talking about Ocarina of Time. Until we die. Well, the way I see it, you've got two options. The first is a one-to-one, by-the-book, completely faithful remake. Maybe even one that uses most of the same, programming and world geometry and everything, and just remakes all the assets just to make it look brand new. This would be more in line with Nintendo's previous remakes and re-releases. Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask 3D, they didn't remake everything, they just kind of redid the assets, and the character models and stuff. And then Link's Awakening, it was a complete ground-up remake, but for the most part, it was a one-to-one, square-by-square recreation of the original. This would be a much more Nintendo-style remake because it would be a much more safe remake. The problem is, though, they haven't really done this with a big 3D game before, remaking it to look like a modern game that you play on a TV. It was one thing when it was still a handheld experience, but remaking all the assets and making it look like a modern game, but not remaking the entire thing, might feel a little bit weird. Like an N64 game with the veneer of a modern AAA Nintendo game. It's a little bit strange, especially Hyrule Field, Looking way nicer, but still not really having much stuff in it. I could be wrong, it's hard to say without actually seeing something like this in action, but it just seems like it might be a little bit awkward. The biggest reason to doubt this, though, is that they already did it. Yeah, it was 15 years ago and on the 3DS, but they still already did it. And Nintendo ain't Sony. They're not usually in the business of just continually updating a game and bringing it up to modern standards multiple times. Okay, so then the other option is remaking the game entirely, from the ground up. Every single 1 and 0, fresh and new. The plus side there is that would allow them to do anything they wanted. But on the other hand, that would let them do anything they wanted. Then you're left with this just giant, towering question. What exactly do you change? How much do you change? For better or worse, this opens the door for not only remaking, but reimagining. See, this whole what is a remake thing, it's a constant ongoing discussion. There isn't really one answer, and I feel like we don't often enough make the distinction between remaking and reimagining. One game could be a ground-up recreation that is still functionally almost completely identical to the original, again, Link's Awakening, and another game could take tons of liberties, basically just take all the basic ideas and totally redo and rethink all of them, as long as the overall experience is similar enough, like Resident Evil 4. Both of these things are called remakes in our world. We don't really have adequate terminology to identify all the distinctions between them. So if Nintendo completely remade Ocarina of Time, what would they do? Maybe they could keep the bones mostly the same and only kind of clean things up, tweak things here and there, make the combat a little bit more involved. You could have more moves, give Hyrule Field some more stuff, to do, maybe even like break it up into more distinct areas, more little activities here and there, or like just at the very least make it look more visually interesting. Just fill the world up with more little details here and there, just to kind of remove the awkwardness of being an N64 game that looks like a modern game. Or would they completely reimagine and rethink every single element, Resident Evil 4 style? It could have the same basic story beats, except all of the dialogue has been rewritten and there's even more. It could have all of the same items, or like most of the same items, but with some thoughtful little tweaks here and there. Some of the items aren't like super useful, so maybe they give them more uses or they kind of cut them out. The dungeons are mostly the same. The whole like lock and key nature is mostly untouched, but just made a little bit more intuitive, a little bit more fun. They could remove sequences, side quests and puzzles and whatnot that just weren't as fun, and add in kind of just whatever they wanted. Basically take the blueprint, like the general design doc of Ocarina of Time, but then just do it again. What would we do if we had this idea, this story, these items, and these ideas, but we did it all today? This complete reimagining is technically an option, but I am pretty doubtful that Nintendo would do that. I mean, there's just no precedent for it. It's not really something that they've done before, and that does not mean that it's not possible. Everything is a thing that has not happened before until it happens. But just considering how safe they've been with their remakes and re-releases up until now, I don't know. I think what is most realistic, and maybe from Nintendo's perspective, the most wise, is something of a middle ground. It is a ground-up remake. You are recreating every single element, and you're giving yourself liberty to reimagine elements, but you're only doing so very conservatively, very strategically, so as to smooth out all the rough edges and create an experience that kind of does feel more or less like a modern experience, but without sacrificing what makes Ocarina of Time Ocarina of Time. It still needs to be familiar enough to people who love that game that it still feels like a faithful remake. It really is a very delicate balancing act. It could still mainly be the same design and general layout, the same basic story and the gameplay beats, and like probably even the same dialogue. Cutscenes can be mostly the same, just kind of gussed up a little bit, and probably even like mostly the same dungeon design. Like, functionally, the game would be mostly identical. If you hadn't played Ocarina of Time in a long time, you'd have a hard time picking out all the little differences, because they would be so strategic and thoughtful that you'd be like, oh, like this seems like it was part of the original experience. It fits so well. It would just be fleshed out and modernized at every opportunity, Hyrule Field. Fill in the empty spaces. You could even make the rest of these locales bigger, as I was kind of talking about earlier. Not like Breath of the Wild big, but just bigger, to give them more of a grand, give the whole thing kind of more of a grand scope. Give you more space to fill in visual details, and fill the world with more NPCs, more action. It's an N64 game, so yeah, it can feel a little dead. There was only so much they could fill the game with. But you could just kind of bring the whole thing to life, and shave off all these little annoying tidbits here and there. Maybe you do chop out some side quests and puzzles and whatnot. Maybe you still do make some tweaks to how certain items work. Some of the lesser valuable items, you can give us more to do with them. Remake parts of the game, bring changes, but with a delicate little touch, doing everything possible to strike that balance between being faithful and making a game that holds up to modern standards. Pre-existing fans are satisfied and newcomers are satisfied. I think this is how you do it. I think this is the play right here. This is how you remake Ocarina of Time. Because I know opinions are mixed on how well the game holds up, but I feel like it holds up pretty darn well. It's still a very grand game. It still has a very epic kind of feel, and it's still very well designed. There's a lot of annoying stuff you have to contend with in there, but for the most part, it's got a whole bunch of dungeons and they're really well designed, all the lock and key stuff, it still works really well. I think with the right mindset, you could make Ocarina of Time feel like a modern game again without really sacrificing its core identity, everything about it that everyone loved so much. As I keep saying though, there just isn't a precedent for this kind of thing. So until it happens, I'm gonna remain a little bit skeptical. It's not impossible, but just, other companies chase these kinds of remakes and re-releases aggressively because they're just such easy money. Say what you will about Nintendo, but their handling of their own re-releases kind of proves that they do love money, like really a whole lot. But there are many areas where they refuse to be reckless, no matter how much money they are leaving on the table. Because seriously, they are leaving a lot of money on the table here. They could have re-released every Zelda and Mario game on every platform several times over by now and probably made billions. And yet they are consistently conservative, very hesitant to revisit a game unless it feels like just the right time. At least when it comes to their biggest, most important classics. And they've said so many times that they're just more interested in doing new things than revisiting older experiences. For a really successful gaming corporation like them, it is surprising how often they choose projects based on what sounds fun. And if they already revisited Ocarina of Time on 3DS, maybe they're still satisfied with that? Has it been long enough for them to find the idea of a big, huge remake fun? And if we're talking about a big, huge remake, might that kind of interfere with development of the next big mainline 3D game? Modern Ocarina of Time remake. It's just one of those things that's been on everyone's wish list for so long. I think pretty much since the GameCube. I think Ocarina of Time may have been 3 years old when these rumors started. So yeah, I don't know. It feels like one of those things so many people want, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're ever gonna get it. But I do have to admit, the rumors are pretty darn strong at the moment. So hey, we'll see. Crazier things have happened. You want to know what Zelda remake I want, though? I want a big remake of the Oracle games in the style of Minish Cap, because Minish Cap is when Zelda graphics peaked.